You know, YouTube. You just gotta get the IG.
It's gonna do it to Facebook. It don't do it to IG. It go to certain platforms. Let me see. Give me 1 second, beautiful people. So you know what? I can just, if you can you just take the link for?
Yeah, send it to me.
I got you. If you can go to the YouTube and put Gilded Sages, I'm sorry. Have I frustrated you? Answer.
Always. I'm a huge person about time.
Yeah, this is. Apologies. I can't work any faster though.
Subscriptions.
And share it to, no, I'm just saying share it to IG. Because I don't want to take it, and again, because I know that's going to piss you off even more. And I don't want to take any more time to actually have to set up the other piece of tech that go along with it.
I just get annoyed.
Or if you tag it and let's see.
You want the link in there?
Yeah.
All right, I got the link.
Then I'm about to go to it, man. You could solve that jump. Let's see.
You can't really click on the link.
And IG. I was about to say you could do it to Facebook and tag me, and then I can manage from there. I got you. All right. Dun. It's all good.
Let's see, can I go from there? There we go. Boom, got you. We're good now.
What you send it to?
I put the link in bio.
Because the link is in our IG bio. And hopefully with editor, I can just chop this off. And then
so we can get the feedback.
Yeah, you don't gotta necessarily have it on. I'm about to get it and scrub it from my other account so that way,
whatever account,
it'll be clean. My other YouTube account. I'm about to take it from there. One watching, one you.
Yes, that was me.
Oh man.
I just know people were expecting us because when we say live, we typically live on IG. So that's when traffic comes in. It's like, you gotta let people know so they can pivot and plan. That's my thing about time. It's like, it's not just our time we asking for.
I don't know, trust me. I get it. And hopefully people are just understanding in that way. Because we're not super, I ain't coming on at 7. And we here as long as, I mean, we here, we could chop it up. We just, the conversation hasn't necessarily started yet.
No, it hasn't. It's gonna take some time for people to file in. Is it recording?
Yeah, it's definitely recording.
Okay.
It's on.
This is why people be having interns on the side, like, yo, get people, buzz people. We need to get people in here. Hurry up, this, that, and the third. But that's another conversation for another time.
Yeah, because the tech part, man, is a whole nother ballgame. And you know, like, I would feel probably worse if I weren't honest and I knew that in myself I was trying to figure this shit out for the longest.
It takes time, but for me, like you saw when I roll my eyes, I mentally process the frustration. I don't care what nobody say. You want to get frustrated. You gotta process that shit and just keep going. It's like, all right, I'm frustrated.
Because I was frustrated myself.
Boom, boom, over the side.
Because I already know me. In terms of like when I seen the clock, I was like, let me not pay attention to the clock because that's gonna make me zone out and tune out. And
see, that's the difference between you and I. That makes me focus.
Because when I was trying to jumble all of the different stuff, I didn't want to get super fixated on one thing and then just lock into that and then have to try to figure it out. Because it's like some copy and paste keychain type stuff that you gotta do with it. But now that we got this up and we figured out the live stream portion of the actual, what do you call it, Zoom piece of it, this will be easier next time around.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
And a new frustration will come about. I keep looking at the screen, but I'm talking to you all. New frustration will come about. That
Kanye.
As we get into the discussion about the people we're going to be talking about, frustration is a huge part of the conversation, I would say. And the important part about it, though, is also being able to process it instead of ruminating in it and sitting in it and just going like, yeah, this is now what I justify my existence. I'm just saying I'm biased, like all humans.
I mean, it's fair.
Oh, damn, did I share it to the Facebook?
It's fair. So, like, in the end, it is what it is.
Oh, yeah, it did.
And then you just go with the best of what happens. That's the part of that's really the biggest part of like putting yourself out there is willing to be.
It's the uncertainty of it all.
Yeah.
It's like I can't help but to laugh.
Why you say that?
Because the way that I process things like that, you know, I talk to you about all the time, the metacognition, the thinking about thinking, the meta discourse, the conversation about the conversation. And in my head, it's just like a person who's constantly frustrated is not a person who's able to see the positive in emotion. And it's like, no one's here right now. So instead of like, oh my God, no one's here, and ruminating in that, it's like, okay, now I get to kind of relax. Just don't drink my drink too fast.
That, and you just make the best of, like, that's one thing that I learned in, like, and I'm sure you can speak to it as well in terms of dealing with institutions. What happens is you kind of just learn how to kind of stick and move. And it is what it is. So again, it all comes with the territory. And like we were talking about last week, I believe, in terms of like discipline regimens and just being willing to like be halfway embarrassed and come back and do it again and repeat the shit over and over and over. Because we could easily say for some of the other conversations that we have had, people weren't necessarily there.
They weren't.
But you just have them in good faith, and you just move on from there.
We just started this in what, 2015? The first videos of us.
Should we put those on the?
Those are more like archival things and things we can chop up later on to make fun of ourselves. If you don't have a sense of humor about yourself, then no one wants to be bothered. I'll speak for myself. I don't want to be bothered if you can't smile and laugh at yourself, not at other people. It's easy to laugh at other people, but it's harder to look at yourself and realistically go, like, is that a real frustration, or is that just me being angry about something else and transferring that frustration to this small hiccup in time and making this about being a transgression versus it's just a hiccup in time. Anyone who's been to a concert knows they damn sure don't start on time. No concert show. I have never been to a live performance and it started on time for the same reasons.
That's true.
It's like people are people. People are people. And that just goes back into what we're going to get into today. It's like technology has made interacting with the things we want as individuals from collectives easy, like Amazon. Most people who order off Amazon think that I ordered this off Amazon, they promise next day shipping, so it's going to be here next day. It's like they don't think about the receiving centers that have to go into that. They don't think about the origin of the project.
I'll be having to get myself under control.
Yeah, bro.
Because I'm waiting on the blazer for like 2 months, but they gave me a $200 off.
$200 off? You talking the drink with Virgil?
The black jump.
Oh, I thought you talking.
Not that one.
I'm so.
You talking about the green one?
Yeah.
Nah.
I'm mad at you.
This a black one that I saw. I was like, man, do I want to get it? And then they did the extra 20% off, so that was like $400. And then it's like, all right, cool. It's a blazer. I can turn it into something.
I waited. I had a threatened Universal Music Group to send me my shirt. The leader of the Delinquents drink with Virgil and Kid Cudi.
What?
Yeah, I said refund in the subject line. Refund in the
How much was it?
60.
Yeah.
For a graphic tee, I know, especially in the days of Barney's, graphic tees can be $700 something.
And yeah, they be going nuts. But I think it just all speaks to, like, going back to the level of patience that you gotta kind of show, the level of patience that you gotta kind of show yourself, as well as other people when you're doing things to try to build. I don't necessarily like the word coalition. That's one of those little nasty buzzwords. But when you building relationships and being understanding with people, and I think it's easy to get frustrated and like super shut down or like go in on somebody. But nah, all those type of positions, especially when people get to talking about all of the money they want to make and where they want to go in terms of their career tracks and how much power they want to amass and those type of things, you are going to have a lot of patience, because in dealing with people, especially, I don't want to say insubordinate people, but people that you have to consistently coax into doing things, especially while you're also paying them. Because I've been on the other end in terms of, like, we've all been young. So until you get older, you don't really get it as like, somebody is actually paying you. So like those meetings when somebody is trying to really get the person to do their work, and it's like, yeah, you wasting time and effort. And a person, like, people don't like when bosses get like a bad rep when you go off on people, but it's like sometimes it has to be done.
It comes with the territory. See, me, the only oppressor I acknowledge, and I wrote about this, is time. Time is the only resource, the only commodity we all have. Steve Jobs had how many? I know He had patents from other people. It's not like he
was
started
a
it. Thomas Edison did the same thing. It's like that's a longer conversation, a broader conversation about innovation and individual contributions to business. But look at how much Steve Jobs was able to amass, and still cancer, time took him from that.
Yeah.
And so for me, it's about when we get down to institutional speaking, which is going to, again, be a further conversation, especially when we start getting to Yeezus.
Yeezy. He almost got as many names as Diddy. Matter of fact, we could just go ahead and jump into the conversation, man.
You can open it up because you know
right.
me.
So, we've been here kind of just chatting for a minute for anybody who's just like dropping in.
Mm-hmm.
This is the Black Anglo-Saxon
Inquisitive Q.
And we are a part of Gilded Sages. And so today we just come in here to chop it up with you all again, to have a conversation around how a lot of these conversations are happening.
Before we jump in, I just wanted to shout out Juan the Poet. He's also part of the Gilded Sages.
We need you here, brother.
Yes.
But in terms of that, and having the conversations around the media now, where entertainers, politicians, everybody's kind of trying to speak to
the same thing, right?
speaking to an issue that they don't really have the context around and have bad communication skills in terms of conveying that message, and specifically in talking about Kanye West and his comments about Harriet Tubman not necessarily freeing the slaves and going from one white owner to the next white owner, and then that receiving backlash. So, and then we also had Joe Biden saying that, he's going to be America's second racist president. So Trump is the first racist president. But before we get into them specifically, I just wanted to lay the floor in terms of how people are trying to engage these conversations. And it's a lot of them too, but those are just the three that kind of have been, and Lil Baby coming behind the coattails of Kanye West and kind of agreeing and having a conversation about, the all lives matter kind of stances.
I wish I was being dramatic. I'm listening.
And I just want to start with Kanye West. I guess I'll give my take first.
Go ahead.
In terms of how I feel about it, what I think about it, because a lot of people, this is the thing, right? And so, you know me, I'm always having conversations about people staying in their lane and doing what it is they do in terms of their profession, what they're good at, and what they've done over time, right? And so when we have a Kanye West get up in front of what I believe was supposed to be a campaign rally, which is kind of asinine in itself, and I don't even understand why we were having a conversation, one, to begin with, because realistically, Kanye West can't win. And so once you bring it down to that, it goes back to he's anchoring it in a very, very capitalist driven, I want to self-promote type of angle. Okay. So it's like, on top of that, right, you're also now having a conversation about Harriet Tubman, the quote unquote state of society, and you're using that narrative, that lineage, that story to galvanize people. But because you aren't necessarily well-read, and because of how you went about it, because I've actually watched the whole thing to kind of get a full grasp of what he was talking about and what was happening. And what you realize and what you see is that, one, he doesn't do a good job in communicating because he bounces from topic to topic to topic. And so it's definitely incoherent. So I understand how you get the soundbite of that Harriet Tubman statement, because he moves directly into a whole nother conversation after that without adding the context of, well, yes, I understand where you were going with it in terms of us even
even after having been freed by Harriet Tubman, we still went into a reconstruction that didn't happen, peonage, convict leasing, and all of those things that basically re-enslaved us over time. So like, I get you, I understand, but the problem is though, and this is where I think a lot of the electorate has to check themselves, because again, he shouldn't be able to even pivot into that lane and have these type of discussions. And so we, like, I hear people saying, you know, oh, well, Kanye is black. If Trump can do it, then let Kanye do it. It's like, no, that's the whole problem. That's the problem. That's how you all want to complain about a situation, but that's why we're at where we're at now, because we're dealing with people who don't have a very good social, political framing of how things work, and not to even talk about the economic piece, because that's a whole nother piece that he doesn't necessarily understand, because then he gets to talking about, you know, who owns what, but then when you hear his rhetoric outside of that, you hear him, you know, align, or you see him aligning himself with Elon Musk from Tesla, championing people like Disney, championing people like Steve Jobs, and but at the same time, though, you're condemning a freedom fighter in the most respectful sense, because again, she didn't necessarily, because what he also left off was none of us as human beings have foresight. So yes, we can argue that, but at the same time, you're arguing that without the context, and the reason that it's problematic is because you weren't talking about the layer of foresight, or her not having the ability to be able to see 50, 60 years down the line, or how, because even when we talk about people, again, like MLK, I'm sure MLK didn't expect for what he died for, or what he was willing to risk his life for, because again, he may have known he was going to die, but again, until he died, he could still proceed, right? And so nobody has that. Malcolm X. And so when he says that, he's not understanding that when you do that, though, you give people a lane to kind of undergird the only real pillars that you kind of have, because you aren't putting any framing around it. But I'm kind of on a rant. Go ahead.
I know where you're going with it, but you know, for me, this is my ongoing critique with Black America. Going to Malcolm X, but Malcolm X says that Black entertainers are not Black politicians.
Mm-hmm.
Going into Martin Luther King Jr. when he says, "I'm sending my people to a burning house." No one has no one's clairvoyant. No one can forecast a future with a degree of definitiveness. I'll say that. No one can definitively forecast the future.
Mm-hmm.
But going back to Kanye, and I say it all the time, Kanye thinks thematically. He thinks in themes. And when you think in themes in broad scope, especially when you start talking about slavery, which is an economic activity that has been used throughout history across the world, but when you start talking about the transatlantic slave trade, you really are talking about the papacy, as in the Pope with the people bulls and Henry the Navigator, and so forth. And so what I'm getting down to is that until you have that level of depth and understanding in your work and what you do, going back to your thing about experience, you shouldn't be trying to articulate those points, because, and this is one of the things that entertainers do not take seriously, their civic duty. Entertainers do not take their civic duty seriously. You can see where most of his things were written by someone who was in a PR firm, and these people who are inside of the PR firm don't know everyone because they live inside their own bubbles. Mm-hmm. Which is to say, when we start talking about intersectionality, when you talk about intersectionality and Black liberation, it usually comes from a white liberal perspective.
Very true.
And it doesn't articulate what Kanye is trying to articulate, especially when he started talking about the NBA and celebrities not having their own voice because they don't own anything. Going back to ownership.
He mentioned the NBA. Can you, because I don't think I remember the NBA voice.
When you talking about
the National Basketball
Association,
yes.
The NBA.
Gotcha.
You good.
And when he starts talking about they don't own anything, so how could you begin to believe that they're giving you their take on it and they're able to speak freely? He's been under these contracts. That's where he's right. He's seen these contracts. He's seen people lose their money for speaking out against NDAs. He's seen those things. He's been a part of it. Going back to the framework, Kanye does not and cannot articulate himself with words as well as he does with music. And so people within his camp need to sit Kanye down and say, you are not that guy that can articulate your music as well as you can articulate your political views, your spiritual views, and your point.
If he has.
I believe he has a lot.
I do.
I believe he has a lot. Like, this isn't new. 2005, Kanye in live, before we had live streams, live, says Bush doesn't care about Black people. He's always willing, Kanye, is always willing to put himself out there to push forth this narrative of we need to talk about Black people and Black issues. He did it with a Netflix screening with David Letterman and talk about the 13th Amendment. He does it, TMZ, he talked about slavery being a choice in the agency of Black people. He's constantly having these conversations. But what I believe when we start talking about the mental health of Kanye, we should also begin to talk about what it means to be an affluent Black man that has leadership expectations as well as leadership level of exposure, but not having those around you who can really guide you in that space. So it becomes this conversation and this question of like, who's around Kanye to go, look, I know what you want to say, I know what you want to do, but this message that you want to portray is not good for this. You have to do this message another way.
But to your point, though, when you talk about him not having people around him to do that, it goes back to your point of what I always say to people is like, look, everything that's happening right now in America, whether it be the political corruption, whether it be the blatant neglect, whether it be the absurdity of wealth when you're talking about everything that's happening with Bezos, because I just saw he did something with the with the small businesses where he had a meeting and then stole their ideas.
That's antitrust though.
It is. But again, we're in this environment, and like you said, to his point, I think what a lot of people do is don't look at the silver lining. And when I say people, I'm not talking about the more informed populace, more so the people who are willing to say, you know what, he's just flat out ignorant, but not look at the fact that here's a man who's in a space that most people are trying to access, right? He's telling you that he doesn't have any agency. The people he's around doesn't have any agency. And so for a lot of people, especially a lot of people that would call themselves, I guess, independent media or like grassroots organizations, it further reaffirms what it is they've also been saying, because it's like, look, the whole idea, he constantly says the silent part in the open, like I said. When he was talking about or having the tantrums with the whole trying to create his label with Sway and him in that, like, how Sway, I'm in it. And
I'm a rebuttal on that one. And I interject as a jazz musician, interject on the piano. I see you riffing over there. And I agree to a certain degree. The thing is it a tantrum? And the reason I want to use and hone in on that language is
it's dismissive.
Not even that it's dismissive, it pigeonholes. Because it's like Trump, only thing he does is throw tantrums. We can say that Obama threw tantrums and his inability, and I'm gonna say inability, I don't care, his inability to tackle race while he was the president of the United States.
Was it inability or
was it he doesn't have the ability? I'm gonna say it outright. I would like for Michelle
and the only reason I ask, because I say when you use the word inability, right, it kind of leans to he just didn't necessarily have that something. So I would say the inability to what, lead or
no, not even inability to lead or live the hard decision. Well, it comes down to the decision, the inability to live with the consequences that come with taking a race argument. That's what I mean by the inability. And it's like, no, until you show me that you have the ability to be a quote unquote martyr, because most of the time, like Colin Kaepernick, what was Colin Kaepernick? He was a financial martyr for police brutality. Now, Nike and the rest of them used what he was doing to promote their shoes, equality, and everything else. But getting back to Kanye and the agency and what you were saying about the tantrums, well, not tantrums, I would like to say impromptu rants.
No, because
I'm listening now.
When you actually watch the video, I'll be fully transparent. I was a huge Kanye fan. I would have been, maybe if you called me 10 years ago, I was that stan that would tell you nothing Kanye does is crazy or wrong, right?
And you know, after Dark Twisted Fantasy, I said I was done because he gave everybody what they wanted.
This is true. Because again, it's about playing that game and fitting that mold. And that's why I got that, album of the decade, and recognized as such, because it does exactly that. But when you look at it and you see the way he presented the actual content for the campaign, it reminded me of a concert that I went to in his latter years, when you get the Yeezus coming down with the mask, and it just being really, those concerts were just rants. Like him ranting on political topics. And I thought it was interesting because, and it may be due to COVID, and maybe he may not necessarily have the resources that he had during that time, but I thought that it was interesting that he would put so much into, like you said, that creative aspect, or like the music. But when you have a political campaign, which is of higher stature, mind you, in terms of what it is you're doing, the industry that you're moving in, and the consequences of the office, and all of those things, right? Exactly. You would think that he would put that level of meticulousness into it. And I just thought that was interesting. But again, that's where, for me, I never even, just like Donald Trump, I never felt like we should have given attention, whether it be good or bad, to people. Like you know me, I was conflicted about even having a conversation about it, because I feel like I'm feeding into it. But then I see people who are saying that, no, Kanye is right, or he's this, and it's like, you know me, I hate meme culture, and I hate the fact that we condense, and not even meme culture, but meme culture in the sense that it's so condensed in terms of what people are kind of projecting, and they don't necessarily understand the narrative that they perpetuate. Because it's like, yeah, I get it. I see why you're saying that he's right, and I see what you're arguing for. But if you, again, are not willing to have that conversation in a very concise way.
Nuance? Are you asking for nuance?
Yes, that's exactly what I'm asking for. Because when you don't do
you can't have nuance. America don't like that.
America don't.
It's hashtag anti-intellectualism.
Yeah.
You can't have that. What you asking for?
This is true.
You just told me, and we're going to get to this, about Joe Biden and the second racist president.
Yeah, I was about to say, that's the perfect segue.
Like, Woodrow Wilson didn't...
Nuance. Hold on. Let's say this, right?
Back to frustration.
Let's
take my tea.
Let's say this. You got Joe Biden.
Because I'm going to come back to Kanye, but I'm listening.
Yeah, it's a full circle.
Yeah.
But you have Joe Biden making that comment when he is the guy who transitioned.
Where did he make this comment at? Was
prison labor? I believe he was on. Let me see. I believe he was on a news show. I believe he was on a news show in terms of actually saying it out loud. Because, as you know, the whole strategy with him is hiding him and making him say the least as possible. Because again, you got Trump, he's just stupid. So he gonna do his own self under. Stupid in the sense that he's not willing to play the electoral kind of game or concede in any way. Because he could have easily did what most people did in terms of the COVID crisis and just kind of throwing blame all around.
Gotcha.
And kind of not just isolating people and calling people crazy stuff on top of being attached to the GOP. Joe Biden says,
I'm looking at right now. We got a comment. It said we have to comment. It said we have to go all the way back to Malcolm and Martin. Where are the Gen X leaders?
The Gen X.
It's a number of Gen X leaders. It's just, again, going back to it, who we actually lift up. Now, people can have their issues with, well, I wouldn't say Cornel West is Gen X, but I could say, what is it?
Don't say Thomas E. Coates. He trash.
I wouldn't say he's necessarily a leader. He sticks to his lane and definitely don't move out of it. Cornel West ran him off the Twitterverse.
Yeah.
So
he trash.
He definitely. But again, I would say people like Yvette Carnell, Tone, because they are Gen Xers in that space.
Okay.
And then you have like how old is Jordan Peterson?
Genesis 5, meaning I don't know.
Because Gen X is my mother age, your mother age.
No, my mother's Boomer.
Boomer?
Yeah, she's Boomer. She's born in 58. She's Boomer.
Okay, yeah,
she's solidly
my
Boomer.
mother.
Yeah, she's
my mother is top of Gen X.
Yeah, she's solidly Boomer. Boomer Hook, speaking of Tone. But when you talk about Tone, Jordan Peterson, then who does not get mentioned? Regina King. Watchmen?
Phenomenal. And I think what the comment may have been alluding to was more so of those overt political leaders that
we're not gonna find them.
Yeah, I agree. Because it's not an incentivized thing. Because I myself, going back to Joe Biden and Kanye and people staying in their lane, what you have is, so right now, I went to school for political science. I came out, got my paralegal certification, worked in government, worked in administrations, did that work. But again, there's a disconnect in between, like you were talking about earlier, the level of civic engagement and what people are willing to pay attention to. So a lot of people who are heavily political or who actually do politics often resort to trying to use other means to bring people in because unfortunately there isn't a base for it in terms of when people say, well, why do we have to go back that far in terms to find leaders of that kind, especially when you talk about overtly seeing people outwardly, because even when you talk about like a Reverend Al Sharpton, those type of people, again, were co-opted doing COINTELPRO and the murder capital eras of DC. And so you can't even say those type of people because those type of people do it out of self-interest and have monetized it to such an extent, because I don't have an issue with people monetizing it as we all have to sustain in some ways, but they've monetized it in such a way where it's not necessarily about the collective. So what has to happen in that conversation is, again, I always say it, people are going to have to start giving their attention to different things because we live in a digital world, bro. We live in a world that is dominated by algorithms. So until people say, you know what, I'm not going to pay attention to the Kanye thing, I'm going to completely ignore it. I'm not going to hate watch it because even hate watch it pushes that algorithm up. I'm going to give my time to the people, to the everyday people who are around here doing work, because then that elevates them. And we both know markets move and adapt to what people are consuming. So if people are consuming political content and people are consuming that raw level of interaction, it's hard for markets to not try to come in and also eat on that.
Okay. I agree. What I will say though is that we had those things. One of the main reasons we have so many interviews, because you have William, at this point in time, I don't even consider myself a conservative or a liberal. Because neither one of these things make any sense philosophically speaking, from the origins. Even classical liberalism in America is thrown off. But I'm getting to the point of we have so many clips of James Baldwin, who's popular, because public television took care of those things and people watched public television. When you have digital and you have the YouTube, one of the things we're fighting for at this very moment is views. So we're being washed out by eyebrow clip videos. We're being washed out by race baiting videos. So content that actually is substantive in the sense of Joe Biden calling himself the second racist president.
Do you want me to read his quote right now before we continue?
Go ahead.
So, Joe Biden, in regards to Trump, the way he deals with people based on the color of their skin, their national origin, where they're from, is absolutely sickening, the vice president said. No sitting president has ever done this. Never, never, never. No Republican president has done this. No Democratic president has done this. They tried to get elected president, but he's the first one that has. Hey, Slim.
No, because this is dumb as actually Kanye.
No, this is worse.
This is far worse because Kanye, as an entertainer, does not have the same intellectual rigor and expectations of
a senator, a sitting senator.
Not even a sitting senator, a former vice president.
You know what? Right.
A former vice president. And just like, but you were the former vice president of the first quote unquote Black president of the United States of America, Barack Obama, the 44.
And they ran their campaign on the GOP being racist.
But my whole thing is like, there's a such thing called the Dixiecrats, the Southern Plan. Woodrow Wilson aired The Birth of a Nation. Birth of a Nation.
1, 2, and jail.
It's like, racism in America is how you get elected. It's like, I'm gonna make sure these people don't take your jobs, these people don't take your jobs. You don't have to say coming from my blackface, take it from South Park, like it's a whole thing. So when we start talking about the intellectual rigor, because this is what it's come down to me, the audience, and this is why the rest of the world has quarantined America. It's like, y'all get y'all shit together. Please. What I'm getting to is that for Joe Biden to say that, and for there to be a conversation around, well, he's not as bad as Trump. This is why Ralph Nader never won. We talk about, well, we need leaders to do this. It's like Ralph Nader did these things. Chris Hedges talks about how he got kicked out of the NY Times, New York Times, because what he was talking about was the truth. But the rest of the world embraces Chris Hedges, RT. You may not like RT, but they're just another news outlet. Not like an RT because they're Russian, is like not like in the Washington Post because it's owned by Jeff Bezos. But that's neither here nor there. That's neither here nor there. But with Joe Biden saying that, and for the conversation to be more about Free Britney Spears, who her own people are saying, like, no, she's under conservatorship, meaning her finances is held by someone else because she does have ongoing mental issues. Kanye, he is diagnosed bipolar. But what we have to get out of in America is treating people by their diagnosis. Just because someone is diagnosed bipolar doesn't necessarily mean everything they do or say comes from their diagnosis. Just because Kanye is talking about things that are getting attention, I don't understand. I really don't understand why people are so focused on not using what he said and just spinning it, blowing it up like we're doing now. It's like, let's go into what Kanye is actually talking about. Joe Biden there, we're not even going into Joe Biden. It's like, what is he actually talking about?
And I think Joe Biden, the toxicity in what he's saying is it's a complete erasure of America. It's a complete erasure of what America, like, understand what this man is saying, and this is why I don't necessarily like this whole immigrants built America conversation, because it allows for those type of things to be said. Because what it doesn't even acknowledge is the founding principles that America is built on. Like, sir, you do so. George Washington. Like, do we just have to name everybody on the money that we got? Like,
It's take too long.
It would. That's why I don't want to go through and name each and every single president all the way even leading through 45.
But even, okay, I'm getting this article out. I sold it to you, the background. Even in the Articles of Confederation, which failed, and which gave to the Conventional Constitution, in the first draft, Thomas Jefferson talked about slavery as being a problem. But the Southern states was like, look, if you want to take care of that, we're going to pull out. And what America don't want to recognize in itself is that this union is constantly under a state of being dissolved. So this tension that we have right now in America, it's important to note that that statement, not only is it divisive and it historically inaccurate, it takes us away from the conversation. It's just like, no, most of the breadbasket of America, the Red Sea is going to vote for Trump. Why? Because Trump is talking about bringing money to them, okay? There's identity politics. No one really cares. Why? Because we're human. At the end of the day, what most of us worry about, our bag. How are we going to get what we want? How are we going to furnish our lifestyles? But to your point about Joe Biden, and this is why that is so scary for me, is that you are basically saying that Trump is.
Dun, 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 dun.
You know what it is? It's like McCarthyism. It's the reverse of McCarthyism. It's like racism. Racists are the new red. They're the new red scared. So if you're racist, then we're going to have to ruin your whole life. It's like racism is an ideology. Now, when you talk about discriminatory practices, then we need to start talking about our institutions, going back to what you were saying about institutions and living an institutional life. We know, well, I know, that if you go to the EEOC, good fucking luck.
Good luck.
Good luck. And the people who are your bosses know that the EEOC is not really going to do anything. So when you start talking about equal employment and being treated nicely and equality and all these things that you want inside of your workplace, you have to fund the people that defend your rights. You have to fund those people.
Going back to the question that we got about, the leaders in terms of when people do take those hard stances, because even when we, look at people who may say things and get it wrong,
at this moment.
And get it wrong.
Because he can bring it that other side. I'm listening.
No, that's all good. Say things and get it wrong. People have, like you said, the tendency to continue to elaborate and build upon it in a way that isn't necessarily productive. Because when we talk about Joe Biden, when we talk about Kanye West, and then we talk about institutional life, and then what also comes up is track record, right? So everybody has a track record.
Like, break it down for a second.
So when you talk about track records, your track record is everything from your behavior, your stances, where you stand on whether it be internal policy or external policy for like legislators. And so the average person would see it, if you're not necessarily in that space, as, oh, this person feels this way about pro-choice or pro-life. And so you do that in everything that you do. And so right now, even in terms of my lifestyle, my track record at this point is I've lived a somewhat healthier lifestyle. So even though I'm not necessarily vegan, I would call myself a pescatarian for people to kind of wrap their mind around it. But all of those things go into your track record. Even small stuff of like wearing your hair a particular way and going and doing that while you're trying to matriculate. That's a track record. That also goes along with the stances where you push, the stances that you've taken, and what you have been willing to risk for what it is.
You say you believe
your square, yeah. Like everybody has their own personal square that's kind of like a jigsaw puzzle because it's not linear in the way that most people think or believe. But what happens is it's just a combination of all of those things. But when you talk about a track record and you talk about somebody like Kanye coming out and saying some ignorant mess like that, if he would have said that immediately after, let's say, his George Bush comments, and then he doesn't necessarily have the years in between of saying the other comments without context, you know, where slavery was a choice and all of these other things, he may have gotten the benefit of the doubt. And that's what that gives you, right? And so, again, like you said, the expectation on Joe Biden is completely different.
Yeah.
But we're also in a situation, in an environment where people are willing to say, oh, let's throw away Kanye, though. But, like you said, this lesser of two evil, Joe Biden is all we have. And, okay, so if you're going to hold one person to that standard, and I hear people's argument about, well, you know, what about the SCOTUS seats? If you're African-American, those SCOTUS seats have done little to nothing for us. Supreme Court nominations. You know, people argue
who cares about Clarence Thomas?
But people, the argument is that if Trump gets reelected, he'll be able to appoint another two to three justices. And that influences the way the decisions come down, which sets a precedent. And again, I get the whole argument, but I think when we talk about us as African Americans specifically, you have to understand that those SCOTUS decisions, especially in recent, when you talk about the pay to vote ruling that just came down, when you talk about the strike down, the
pay to vote,
they upheld the courts, the lower courts, and the Supreme Court when Florida was taken, or they were supposed to be able to allow ex-felons to vote, and they wanted to amend the fact that they had to pay back fines and fees to be able to, you know, to vote. And so
taxes.
Yeah, that's all it is. And so when you have that, and when you have a SCOTUS that doesn't, and when you look at the decisions, in some cases they're unanimous. The one that just came out in regards to the poll tax, I think it was. No, it wasn't 5-4. It wasn't 5-4. It was more lopsided. The quote unquote liberals ones did dissent. I think Ruth dissented. Sotomayor, I think he dissented, but let me see. I would have to look it up.
That's fine. Cause I was just waiting to comment on. This is why I don't look at identity politics, right?
Oh yeah, identity politics is church.
Justice Clarence Thomas is the epitome of why identity politics does not work.
Mm-hmm.
And if you don't know Clarence Thomas' history, there's always YouTube.
And he just released the book.
I'm not reading it. I'm not reading it. Because Clarence Thomas he has no interesting views on the legal system of the United States. Nothing that Clarence Thomas produces. I would rather go back and read 19th century dissenting arguments. I would rather go read dissenting arguments for legislation that helped African Americans than to read Justice Thomas' book. And this is why. We are Americans, I include myself in that population, are living in a time in which we don't live for principle, but we fight against someone else's morality. And what I mean by that is that if you live by a principle, going back to track record, if you live by a principle, you're an activist. Once you get to a certain level, how do they co-opt activists? They make the activist a spokesperson for their movement. So how are you going to be on CNN looking too nice, going back to Al Sharpton and the rest of them? How you gonna go and say that you're an activist, but you work for the system that you say that you're against? That's again, Audre Lorde's. You can't dismantle the masses' house with the masses' tools. So that's why when the left starts to talk, especially the far left, it's like you haven't acknowledged your elitism in the left. So if you arguing for me, it's not. Again, it's white liberalism cloaked in blackface when you start talking about black liberation, because you are not willing to let go of the economic advantages that came from the quote unquote dead white males no one's supposed to read. And if you read the dead white males, you go like, damn. And in the Magna Carta, you're like, damn. White men have been fighting to vote for centuries. Shit. Maybe we need to make sure everyone gets the chance to vote. And then it becomes divisive, and why the DNC doesn't win, because it doesn't have a base.
No.
It doesn't have a base. It's all about arguing against the GOP. So when it
that's why their messaging is so off.
That's
Nobody
why Joe's
wants
so
to talk
stupid
about it. Nah, Joe, I don't even want to put that on. Man, damn, that's bad, bro. I keep saying the second, because if he win, he the second racist president.
I'm leaving Canada. Let me in, please. I'm sorry.
You American.
I know y'all racist too, but can y'all be British like racist and not like American like racist? I don't know the difference too well, but it seems like in America they give you trees and ropes to hang yourself. I don't want to do that. Drake, let me in. Your house is big enough. Let me in, Drake. Come on.
Nah, that comment right there is on another level of ignorance. And that's dangerous, man. That's so dangerous to get on TV as, like you said, the former vice president. And this is why people want to, always get on me about, I need Barack Obama to really just, what are your thoughts on this man? What are your thoughts on his comments? Like, y'all talk a lot. I know that's your guy, Joe Biden. I really just want to hear the thoughts from Obama on Joe Biden.
You're not.
I know I'm not, but can a man dream?
A man can dream, but you get shot for it.
Man,
especially
look,
when you black.
Look, we hoping and praying, man. Look, Ghislaine Maxwell and the courts, we may get the list of the people who was on Epstein's pedophile island. Look, what is hope?
The judge's son got shot, son. We got to comment. I am not laughing at the judge getting shot, the child being shot, whatever the circumstances are. What I am laughing at is the irony and the irony of it. But we have a comment asking us to go back into about Kanye and slavery and him saying it was a choice. The TMZ conversation. And here is where it gets really, I'll jump out there because I'm used to getting shot up for being controversial. Slavery is a choice in the sense that humans have agency. Life gives you the agency to, not everybody ran away, to rebel, to run away, or to start maroon communities. Maroon meaning that they ran away, but they didn't run too far from the plantation, they just got away from the plantation.
There's a whole lot of options in that.
There's a lot of options in that.
And that's where
I'll
wait. Oh, so like
I can come back in.
So because in that, again, and this is where politicians do it as well, is you have these truths with a lot of omission. So like you said, in that is the truth that each person has his own agency. But what he doesn't discuss is how there were tons of slave rebellions. How, again, then he comes on and talk about Harriet Tubman, how you have so many movements just like hers before we even get to the pivotal moment of even having a Harriet Tubman. It doesn't discuss how many times slaves have rebelled singly or tried to poison their slave master and tried to do those type of things to get out of that situation. So when you make the broad blanket statement with your entertainment superstar cachet, which influences people, the danger in that is that it allows other institutions to come in and undermine any argument. So like, for example, right now, you have Ados, Dirty, and a bunch of people arguing for reparations, a bunch of people arguing Ice Cube did a thing, a contract of some sorts, but you basically have people in this moment trying to jockey for position in terms of their political claims and policies that they want. But when you have people like Kanye or Lil Baby, who we haven't touched on yet, because he comes out and says things, it allows for a person who say, I'm not in opposition to racism in America. I can then take that argument and use that and say, you know what? Well, Kanye said this. It's the same thing that Mitch McConnell did when you have Obama saying he doesn't support reparations. And so when Mitch McConnell was presented with the same question, he's saying, look, y'all got Obama, and Obama also said that he didn't support reparations. And so you have this dynamic where people are like, oh, Mitch McConnell and them are racist and all of this, which they are, right? But you can't also at the same time move around the fact that a lane was created. Like when people are saying these type of things, you have to understand that a lane is created because politics is all about extracting. It's about getting the resources. It's about using whatever you have at your disposal to get there. And so you're in this vehicle and you're trying to get there, right? And so
shout out Dave Chappelle.
And so when you have a person coming out saying something like that, you in your vehicle trying to get there to the White House, let's say, for a destination, and boom, Kanye's illicit statement comes in, and now think tanks and all of these institutions or universities that get grants get to go in, make an argument and say, well, look, because even like we were talking about earlier, when you have the 1619 Project and other people and how these institutions cherry pick information. Cherry pick information, and because again, going back to how people asked about, okay, why do we have to go back that far for leaders? It's because again, that same level of attention that doesn't go to leaders also doesn't go into being well read enough to see when a person is trying to make a move on you in terms of their ideology.
Yes. I did that because the term racism and the way it's used now is divorced from the physical violence that existed in the 60s. It's divorced from going back to Kanye and saying slavery was a choice. You got the Armistead case where the slaves of the Armistead fought. There are legal cases in which people who were enslaved fought for their freedom. There are cases when people who were enslaved bought their freedom. What we have to understand about slavery is that each state had its own slave codes. Code Noir, which is Louisiana. When Louisiana was controlled by the French, because the United States is really a trading post for the Europeans. It really is.
Still, to this day.
It's a trading post. South Carolina got its slave code from Barbados, from Jamaica. What's different about South Carolina and Jamaica is that the British really didn't live on the island in which they held their slaves. But in South Carolina, they live next to their slaves, and there is a huge paranoia about slave rebellion because the population was larger with slaves than it was of white people, or I should say enslaved, Black enslaved or African enslaved bodies. So getting back to the point about Kanye and his statement with TSZ and the danger of speaking when you don't have the expertise. Yes, I'm glad he said that because we're able to have the discussion. However, because Kanye is not able to produce a sophisticated answer that specifies what he's talking about, that delivers a premise, a thesis statement, and it is supported by evidence and is supported by studies, we have to have these type of conversations instead of, what I mean by these type of conversations about Kanye is about, I'm speaking also to the community. Right. It's like, my bad. No, you good. It's live. We aren't able to talk about certain points. I have to bring up the slave codes. I have to bring up why New Orleans music is so different, because New Orleans they were able to keep more of the African traditions because French slave holders were not the same as English slave holders, and how in Florida, which was held by the Spanish, you have a lot of African Americans or slave Africans at this point in time linking up with Native American communities and having that come through. So what becomes important with that, going back again to Kanye and Team Z, what becomes important is that when he says these inflammatory, because it really is an inflammatory like comments, that we don't rush the judgment. We don't rush the judgment. Kanye needs to sit in front of an interviewer who's willing to ask him the hard questions, and don't be like what's his name, Sway, and not be like Sway and have Kanye basically yell over him and just go like, Kanye, I kind of don't give a damn right now.
But that's the thing.
Because let me finish this point before I forget it. Like, Kanye, I don't kind of give a damn right now because we're not talking about music. We know that you can do music. We know you can do fashion, but you're talking about my kid's life. We're not talking about North life. We're not talking about your family life. We talking about my kid's life. We talking about the legacy. You need to bring, to your point, some evidence, because people can use this against us. And if you saying that the Black American community should be helping you, that the Black American community should be supporting you, which a lot of people do, we need your very visible support within the community off the cameras. No Sunday service. I don't give a damn about no Sunday service. We got enough evangelical preachers. No Sunday service. I need to see you in Chicago at the mayor's office asking questions about what's going on in the Black communities in Chicago without Kim being there, without Chris being there, without the Kardashians. Because going back to your track record, because if you're not doing those things, then you lose credibility politically, because going back to politics, politicals is the affairs of the city. If you're doing this and you drop a new album, now it's marketing. Mm-hmm. Now everyone can talk about, well, Kanye does this for marketing. Yeah. So how are we racist by bringing up racism when he does it for marketing?
Because to your point about the whole thing of people not being able to drill down, and this is like the problem with not, or I would say the African-American community not elevating, like you said, people who speak in defense of them and people who know what it is they're talking about. And I know I've mentioned their name a number of times, but those are the people who I feel like speak for me. You know what I'm saying? In terms of Yvette Carnell, people have battled that against me, but it's like, look, she speaks specifically for me. There's some things that you don't have to agree with person on every single thing. I agree with her on most things. There's not much I can say that I disagree with, but outside of like approach. But in the end, again, approach does matter, but I don't necessarily disagree with their approach in terms of how people may say that it's divisive, because in politics, especially where African Americans are right now, going back to that point, we don't have the bandwidth economically, we don't have the intellectual capacity to be spread out amongst coalitions who are and understand that you have to build a home base before you can even start exchanging with other coalitions. So when people say that, no, I get it. Because what happens is you get a Charlemagne the God who interviews a Joe Biden, right? Lets him walk all over him, doesn't check him on the again, not a lie, because the whole thing about, well, Joe Biden didn't create mass incarceration. Okay, I'll give y'all that. But let's talk about since you want to use technicalities, what he did do was transition it into a modern era.
Yeah.
When you talk about how you incentivize prisons, state prisons, as well as private prisons, and how you mechanize that labor to be used by corporations. That is transitioning. And on top of that, when you have the war on drugs, yes, you then exacerbate that. So when you get down to, again, people not being able to blow air into the balloon to expand these conversations, you leave so many things unsaid, and that's why people get into the more trivial conversations, and then you have another populace that just wants to have only the more superficial conversation, and that therein lies the problem, because that therein lies why we don't necessarily have the intellectual acumen, and why we don't have the leaders not necessarily there, but in place. Because I'm tired of people saying we don't have the leaders. There are leaders. There are leaders. They are not just in position. And the only way that you get political leaders in position is with people power. You need 100, 200, if you talking locally, to, oh yeah, if Devon or somebody say something or they want something, it need to be 200 people on command that's willing to go ham, or that's willing to make calls to the leaders, to the elected, or flood them with mail, or sit on their steps, Freedom Plaza, which is DC. I need people to be willing to do that, but nobody really wants that part, because we are like this super inclusive, and that super inclusiveness is imbalanced when you talk about politics. It has to be a give and take. And again, because a lot of people think that I don't necessarily want that exchange. I just understand that we have to get to a certain point before we start making that exchange.
I would think a lot of people don't think you're flexible.
A lot of people don't
think you're flexible. But when you kept saying the trivial, the thing that came into my head was Little Baby. I'm gonna preface this. I don't care what rappers say about politics. That includes Sean Carter. That includes KRS-One. That includes Talib Kweli. That includes Yazin Day.
Oh, he got banned from Twitter.
He should have got banned from Twitter. I had beef with Talib because Talib likes to talk out the side of his neck about what he's going to do politically. To borrow his own lyrics, you New York niggas are spoiled at shows. So you didn't show up when it comes down to politics and policy, but you showed up when the ADOS went for you for endorsing policy, or Harris, who we don't know her identity. So you decided that you were going to attack, but you didn't get banned for Twitter, Talib, for that. You got banned because you were harassing people. That's why you got banned for Twitter. But I'm interested into what Little Baby had to say, and this goes back again to entertainers are not politicians. If you read this quote, I'm pretty sure I'm gonna have a tantrum. Now,
no, you're not gonna have a tantrum because again, it's a combo without the context. Exactly. Because I don't fully disagree, because I was about to write a post the other day that kind of speaks to it. So, Little Baby.
I'm listening.
These dudes with these names, man. Everybody is a baby.
You can't be a man. You gotta be Little Wayne, Little Baby. You gotta be Little something.
So, in a recent interview, the rapper discussed his point of view on police brutality, the justice system, and systemic racism. Him, quote, "I've been a victim of police brutality. I've been in prison where white officers control you. I've been in a court system where white judges give you a different time than they would give someone white. There have been times I had a physical altercation with an officer, and he then grabbed me and took me to a room where there's no camera." He went on to say that it doesn't matter what color you are, everyone can be racist. To me, a racist is someone who treats a different race than theirs a different way than they would treat theirs. I feel like if you're a Black person and you treat all Black people one way and all white people one way, you're racist. And before I give my first say, if you're in the comment thread, like the video, share the video, throw the comments. The comments are all of the better. That way, we can have a better conversation that way. I don't like lecturing.
Give us feedback. Tell us what you want to hear. More importantly, for me as Inquisitive Q, help me with my delivery to help understand, break things down that you feel is important. That's important, because what I hear from Little Baby is someone who's been inside the juvenile system, because he's not that old. He's not that old.
He may be like, what, 20? Go ahead.
What I'm saying from what I get from what he's saying is that he's had these anecdotal, put in that word, he has these anecdotal experiences. It's basically
25.
he's 25. He's a less backed. I should say this. He doesn't have the same resources that Meek Mill has by working with Jay-Z's camp. So you have Lil Baby speaking about his experiences with police brutality. The problem, and again, here's where the problem will come in. Was Lil Baby involved in nefarious acts? And does his criminal record reflect any acts of violence? Because once you go to Fox News, once you go to more conservative pundits, his words fall flat because now you have that reasonable doubt.
Because I was about to get
Go
to
ahead,
that.
I'm listening.
Nah, because I wanted to say it was the problem that he did was one, you indicted yourself. You indicted yourself and you used it, like you said, anecdotal situation to talk about a systemic issue. First problem. That's a bad habit. Me, Matt, and I needs to be removed from political conversation. Political conversations are about collectives. I don't care about me. I don't care about him. It doesn't matter. It's about the whole. We move as a whole. A lot of people always say, again, you hear me say it, a lot of people always say, we aren't a monolith, but that's the problem. We need to be monolithic in certain ways. I'm not saying that everybody has to be the same, but there has to be a baseline in terms of our principles, in terms of our common knowledge, and all of those different things before we can really move the ball forward. Because the problem is that we have coalitions within coalitions, and then we think we're going to go out into other coalitions that are very organized and undermine what it is they're doing. So you not only have that being this super anecdotal assessment of it, the problem is I don't think he understands when you're talking about racism and systemic issues. One, you're talking about a trend, you're talking about patterns. And what he does is he kind of justifies the behavior of these institutions that have been bred and built out of, again, the other racist presidents that don't exist according to Joe Biden. We have that, and we have the policies that are in place still to this day. Like the reason you're having that action as a juvenile, and again, if you wouldn't have indicted yourself here, I could have made the argument that you had that interaction because not because you grabbed him, but because statistically there's a higher rate for you to get pulled over for nothing. And there's also an incentive attached to it to police your neighborhood in a particular way. But see, I can't even make the argument for him now because one, you said that because again, somebody treats somebody else differently because of their race makes you racist.
Are you saying that Lil Baby doesn't understand the law, although he likes to break it? Because here's my point. Gangsters in America at one point in time knew the law well. Shout out to the Kennedy family. But
I'm about to get a shot.
No, they get shot the most. But that's
They about to Epstein your ass.
I'm not that important.
I'm not.
But I'm laughing because it's true. It's like, to your point, what you just saying. The reason they say shut your mouth, and the reason that you have the Fifth Amendment not to incriminate yourself, is so that someone who is a professional, who understands law, who understands the implications of their statements, can come in and go like, hush, little baby, don't you cry. It's so funny how you fit into that lullaby. Pun intended, like go to sleep. You better off going inside of the interrogation room and going to hell to sleep. Don't say nothing. But to your point, it's like if we're gonna have someone, if media, because I'm not gonna keep picking on the rappers, if media is gonna constantly look over Michael Eric Dyson.
They said it.
Huh?
They said it.
Who said it?
The rappers.
The rappers, they did. So they have to be accountable.
Because if I say something stupid, y'all better hold me accountable.
Please. if we're going to overlook Dr. Cornel West, if we're going to overlook legal scholar Michelle Alexander, if we're going to overlook legal scholar Kimberly Crenshaw, and we're going to overlook all of these scholars who can articulate what's really going on in America and has gone on in America within a minute, because they're that well versed and they have written for in rapper, and we all know that white executives are the people who control the rap industry. Let Rock Nation not confuse you. They don't have that kind of power.
Rock Nation brunch.
Going right back to what Kanye said. And that's why Jay-Z has and chose Meek Mill, because Meek Mill is easier to control when it comes down to speaking. Jay-Z wants the control over who says what.
Mm-hmm.
He don't like Dame because Dame says he want to say. He don't like Kanye. He tries to say what he want to say. Meek doesn't. And the reason I'm tying that because of Little Baby. Little Baby, if he was better versed at what he was experiencing as a youth, he would come out and talk about, and this is why we get KRS-One. You got to give the 90s generation and the 80s generation of hip hop their credit. They understood that the economic situations that they were in were not due to them being Black, as in they born Black does not make you inherently inferior. But in today's time, and no matter what people say, a large part of the population likes to talk about Blackness as if there's something inherently wrong with Blackness, and we got to get ourselves together. We got to do better.
That's because they're not looking at the policy. And that's because
that's not my point. They don't get it. You're in the ghetto for a reason.
And that's why we have to address these type of comments, because again, when you leave all of that context out, you have people, again, who are your opposition that can come in and say, oh, man, look, there's a lot of racist people in this world who know the reality and know the truth. And they use people's ignorance against them. It's like, look, people think that, you know, Donald Trump is heavily stupid. It's like, son, he know, and people know when they're fudging history, it's not a coincidence in that way. It's what you have to understand is you're dealing with highly intellectual people, one, very strategic people. And so, again, for these people to be in this space of elected officials, celebrities, where you have access to a lot of universities, people, because again, these people could reach out to, I'm sure, a university and sit down and get all of the information that people will be loving and willing to do it for them, to be attached to it. So there's this level of manipulation that I think a lot of people don't allow themselves to believe, because we're in a space in America as Americans right now, and it's like we're not believing what we're seeing. We're not believing what we're hearing.
And because I know that for me, it's not like I'm lambasting America. It's like, no, I'm deeply, 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 deeply concerned for future generations. Deeply. And why I'm so concerned is that if we can't get it right, if we can't cooperate, here's to the point, and this is what I believe, this is pure speculation. Americans tend to believe that process is inevitable, that as time moves forward, we'll have progress. However,
that's why I hate hope.
A lot of people don't really understand the maintenance of society, especially sophisticated societies, is when you have a representative republic, which is the America, but more importantly, regressing, going back, falling back. We talk about Reconstruction and how it failed, but what we don't talk about is how the KKK, like the Nazis, were not that big of a party. What happened? Money. When white America goes broke, it goes, we about to rob everybody.
Everybody.
If you're not us, and when I mean white America, I mean institutional people. I don't mean the color of your skin, because there's plenty of poor white people.
Because I had, not to cut you
Go
off,
ahead.
I didn't post the post, but to Lil Baby's point, I wanted to have a conversation around Black people can't be racist in the way that he was professing.
He is top 5. The comment is that Donald Trump is one of the top 5 marketers of all time. He is top 5.
Yeah, I agree.
I give him top 3.
He's the president of the United States. That's arguable. But in terms of the people being racist or black people being racist, again, we don't necessarily have that institutional power. Back to Kanye's statement and revealing that if you really want to just look at a vulnerable person, kind of just saying a silent thing out loud, like these don't got no control over nothing, y'all. But in that, what I wanted to say to people, because a lot of people harp on that, and a lot of people, especially African Americans, black people, especially too, POCs, they use it as a deflection and not understanding that though you can't be racist in that way, you can be a participant and undergird it. So what I mean by that is, because in the post I had wrote, I myself as a young black male who has matriculated within government and the political space, I have done things that I can say aided and abetted the institutions that have already been in place. Because when people talk about playing the game and when people talk about aligning themselves with behaviors to quote unquote win, you produce, there's a residual of that behavior. So everything that I could market or everything that I've done to get there, it further solidified a pattern or a trend or a rule. And so that means that everybody behind me has to then and therefore fall in that same line.
Precedent.
And exactly, it sets the social precedent.
De facto.
And what happens is, to your point, the de facto is your behavior, and laws are only as good as what people are willing to go along with. And when you're talking about protections as it pertains to law, the laws are only as good as you have the money and wealth to access the courts, to access those rights, as you live in a society that constantly infringes on rights. Because when you talk about capitalism, you're talking about a system that is built on exploiting, whether it be the supply chain, whether it be labor, whether it be anything. You're taking something, an issue, let it be anything. You're exploiting that thing to create capital, to monetize it, to bring yourself forward.
Yeah. If we have real.
And so when you talk about people participating or quote unquote, black people can be racist too, what I will say is that you can be a proxy to racism. And I know everybody loves The Matrix. The Matrix is a good movie that kind of highlighted when you actually understand the dynamics of behavior and algorithms and patterns and trends. When you see the agents, if you make them, if you make them different colors, understand that you can be an agent for quote unquote white supremacy, because you begin just making those same discriminations based on zip code, based on hair texture, based on language, based on where you eat.
Hashtag respectability.
Right.
Hashtag
and that's what that is.
black flight. That's what that is.
Again, we talked about black flight in another video. Y'all can check that out. When we talk about, I get and understand why you have black flight in terms of taking your
short-term strategy.
Research. It is a short-term strategy. But again, when you talk about, and when you have people like this, Lil Baby, talking about, black people can be racist too, what he's not talking about is the survival mechanism that kicks in terms of a person understanding they're in a capitalist society and saying and making a decision, you know what? I have these resources. I understand that blackness, quote unquote, and how it was built in America depreciates the value of assets, whether they be human, institutional, real property, and so on. I'm going to take myself and move that away, because I'm also moving away from the ills that have been placed in the community that were designed to perpetuate the outcome. So I have to distance myself from it.
Okay.
And that in itself, I get it, but that in itself is perpetuating and participating in a racist infrastructure.
Okay, I get you. And that's why I would say white people, as in the legal term in the melting pot of Europe, white people, your people of European descent, I don't like getting to genealogy, but I'll do it, are the agent Smiths, as in a Karen can call the police and have the institution help her, whereas Akeisha cannot. Whereas Akeisha, if she calls, I'm using stereotypical names, if Akeisha calls the police, then she's most likely to get attacked, whereas a Karen is most likely to be protected. That is Agent Smith. Being a proxy to race is when you're eating a steak and you know the steak isn't real, but you know the steak feels good because you've seen the real world and you don't want to be there anymore. But if you take that argument of economic realism, or as Dr. Kenneth Clark would call moral schizophrenia, where you know what you're doing morally isn't necessarily the best for the collective. However, you kind of have this selfish rationalism that is good for me, therefore is good for me to participate in. If that argument, which is the status quo, continues, then at no point in time does it make sense for any person who is from the melting pot of Europe to argue for the liberation of Black people. It makes no sense. But this is where I would interject, is that once you begin to understand racism as a cognitive bias against skill, talent, effort, drive, motivation, once you begin to understand sexism as a bias against women who have the skill, the talent, the drive, the knowledge to accomplish a job, then you begin to understand the stance of I'm gonna do it because it works, does not work as a long-term strategy because you waste more resources giving opportunities to people who aren't competent in their field of expertise or are not at the top of their field of expertise versus someone else who isn't. So what I'm basically saying is that if you take the short-term strategy of this economically benefits me, therefore I'm in a position to win by perpetuating a racial and sexist system, then you're taking a short-term strategy in which you begin to eat yourself, because at one point in time, you will be consumed as well. And one example of people who are at the top of the economic ladder, who were economic elites, who were education elites, who chose not to do that, is the White Rose organization during Nazi Germany. These were people who were considered Aryans, but they understood ideologically that this is not for the betterment of Germany. So that goes into patriotism versus nationalism. And in America, for me, a lot of liberalism, or what most people would know now is the buzz term neoliberalism. Thank you, Noam Chomsky. You love creating terms or using them. But neoliberalism, in the sense of we need free markets and let's have free markets, seems to make it legitimize that liberalism and free markets actually ever existed in America.
Yeah.
It didn't.
That's a good book, Rob, about, I want to say Robert Reich Saving Capitalism.
Yeah, but every single time you talk about America not having free markets, now you become a libertarian. It's like, no, if you have a strict labor market that's controlled by slavery, then you don't have a market for wages, you don't have competition. You don't have to believe a damn thing I say. Right now, America is not going back to Jeff Bezos, America is not at the top for being the most competitive economies. You said saving capitalism, and I'm going to give it to you after I talk about Teddy Roosevelt. Teddy Roosevelt is another person. He came from wealth. He came from affluence, but he was one of the biggest presidents to bring up the antitrust. Now, him and the Rough Riders going down into war, that was a problem with people believing that they are superheroes. But when he began to understand antitrust, and he broke up Standard Oil, what's his name? Who did? John Rockefeller? John Rockefeller made more money when Standard Oil was broken up than when he was doing it. So my point, and to your point about racism, and I'm adding sexism, is that these are short-term strategies for wealth allocation, for resource allocation, as well as building a base. However, when you talk about the long term, because we really competing with life and time, it doesn't work. It falls apart. And that's why you keep having these vicious, violent outbreaks, because you're putting people in this pressure cooker that is poverty, and they physically cannot maintain the ongoing stresses that come with not having your daily needs met. And we don't have to talk about Black people when we talk about this. If you want to walk or read about white people suffering from poverty, read As I Lay Dying by William Faulkner. In the beginning of the book, one of the women talk about poor people can't afford to change their mind. So we don't talk about poverty in America, and that's one of the main reasons why we can't have a true conversation about race. Because for me, America was set up by folks willing to enslave others so that they themselves wouldn't have to be poor anymore. And that's for me, when we start talking about race and when we start talking about sexism, it's like,
it's all buffers. Those things are buffers to the core issues, because I just wanted to bring up Mersha Bardaran, I think her name. I'm sorry if I mispronounced her name, because I actually like her and her book, The Color of Money. But I posted the other day, she made a comment about how Black people have kind of been the only people that have participated in capitalism in America.
Yeah.
And I thought that was an interesting statement, because I never heard it framed that way, especially on national TV. But I appreciate it, because what it does is it puts into perspective, again, like we're talking about, the policies that are on the back end that create the environments and the pressure and the strife and the scarcity and all of the things that produce all of these outcomes. And so when you have people who have conversations about Black on Black crime, and it's like, look, bro, that also, when we're talking about conversations without context, right? And I have people who I would say I'm cool with, who have that stance, and it's so frustrating, because it's like, look, what you're not understanding is, one, Black on Black crime is not racist. You're talking about crimes, one, that are punished, because I want people to understand that in most cases, Black people are held accountable for the crimes that they commit.
I have a dissenting argument, but I'll wait.
Because what happens is people juxtapose it to the police brutality, and use that to undermine, again, you're using that to undermine an argument around people who are trying to have a conversation around systemic issues within our police force by saying Black on Black crime, without the context that the crime that is produced in the Black community, even though all crime is done in proximity, the crime that we have at the rate that we have has also been curated. So if you're not having that conversation around why we are having that level of crime, it's just as problematic as people saying Kanye West is, because you got the same people who would say that or make the Black on Black crime argument going at Kanye West, or going at a Lil Baby, or going at anybody who they feel like, is saying something ill-advised, which they have their right to do, but also understand that you're participating in the same type of behavior. Because again, I don't have an issue with anybody talking about crime per se and us addressing crime, as yes, we do have to address crime in our community, because again, it adds another layer of stress. It adds another layer of obtaining resources, because now people are moving differently around the community because of that fear that's there. But again, in not doing it in a very full way, it is problematic. And again, keeping it around what she had to say is that
she as a who?
Mersha Bardaran.
I got you.
In her comment about us actually participating in capitalism, and you talking about the founding principle of us being developed out of people who enslave people to make themselves wealthier. So you have in this sense of capitalism, there is a dog eat dog environment, and that has to be addressed through policy. And enough, like you said, there isn't enough attention given to how policy and how things that incentivize that are just as violent, if not more violent. I always say, like, the pen is mightier than the sword.
It is. And here's my dissenting argument about black on black crime.
Mm-hmm.
I do not like making one group of angel and another group of demon. So when we talk about black on black crime, it's like, okay, what you're talking about are humans, and most of those crimes are non-violent when we talk about black on black crime, especially with the marijuana industry growing. So we have to talk about crimes of poverty and crimes that are malicious. Like, because then we have to add in, there are sexual predators who are black within the black community, who do use this don't snitch environment, or you a snitch if you tell as an advantage. There are people who prey on older women. There are people who prey on single women. There are people who uses the gun to get their way, who don't have any, and I mean absolutely any, loyalty to the black community. When the conversation about the streets, because this is really a conversation about the streets when you start talking black on black crime, and I will take the streets, because I call it the Germanic honor code. When we start talking about that, it's like, to what point are civilians safe? And to what point are soldiers responsible for their actions and the actions of the people around them? And we're going to say that we, and when I say we, I'm taking on this character of being a quote unquote street person. When are we going to say that we're doing this because we are economic innovators and we are excluded from legitimate businesses? And we have no other recourse than to use illicit means to feed our families. And because we do that, we understand the risk that we're running, like the bikers say, the 1%er. Being a 1%er. I know that I'm taking on nefarious actions and illicit actions because I am excluded from the economic infrastructure that is America. Mm-hmm. If I'm saying that, then that means I'm also holding myself to the standard of the safety of people who are not a part of that. And what we see too often is that people are willing to use shields. Don't believe me. Nas, when he talks about your accident murder, when we talk about 10-year-olds getting shot, it's like, okay, you have black on black crime it has an undergird of white supremacy and saying that black people have this propensity towards criminality, that they're naturally criminals. However, we have to acknowledge intra-culturally, I-N-T-R-A, meaning within the group. We have to acknowledge there are nefarious actors, and there has to be a process in which those nefarious actors are removed from the protection of the community. Like, I can't protect you if you
gotta get excluded.
You gotta get ousted. It's like, no, you have had how many gun charges? You have had how many? And you did what? Like, don't use that black card, bro. It's not an annex. We're not taking that charge for you.
And that's
you're not allowed to say that.
That's where it comes in when, again, you gotta have that baseline. Without that baseline, it's really hard to manage any group. Because if we can't exclude interculturally, how do we plan to exclude people who somebody might say you got governors who do blackface and all types of things? We go down a long list. Mm-hmm. What is the line that we draw as a community, as African Americans, and what is the consequence for stepping over that line? So, in bringing it back to Kanye, Biden, and Lil Baby, and just having and kind of bringing it into summation, we have to get to a point of is this Kanye's last straw? Again, Kanye can be Kanye. We don't have to bash him or anything, but do we instinctively and meticulously go about extracting his resources? A lot of people are going to vote for Joe Biden just because, without any exchange, after he continues to make bumble after bumble and gaffe after gaffe. So again, I don't necessarily believe he is that much better of an option because his statements prove to be way more dangerous, because at least with Donald Trump, he is a walking manifestation of what America is. And there is a level of light at the tunnel in that. And I think we have to get really, really, really smart, like you said, about short term and long term. Because in the short term, Biden may be better off, but when you're talking about him having comments around erasing lineage, and you see his policy that he released in terms of, you know, upping the quote unquote undocumented non-citizens resources and monies and programming and things of that, fostering the Latino community, all of those things. What is our line to say, okay, we can't support you?
I would love to have that as another live, another conversation, to not fall into the same trap of this conversation of having without context. So I would love to research that topic.
I like that.
And that can most likely be the next live. And for me, I would love if you all like, comment, subscribe, share, offer feedback. And if you believe that that is a good live, let us know on our Instagram pages, Inquisitive_Q, and
the Black Anglo-Saxon, THEE, Black Anglo-Saxon, and our Gilded Sages page. That's an easy capture-all. You can leave any feedback on there, or you can use the hashtag eavesdrop on us to submit that, because that is very helpful in terms of trying to engage you all, as we can't build a community without you all.
Exactly.
Like, us talking to ourselves is pointless. And I really like the feedback. I really like the discourse. It's one of the reasons I got into politics, to be able to have these type of discussions and this type of discourse. But I like how you spent that in terms of, you know, to avoid doing what we're talking about.
Yeah, let's not be hypocrites.
Let's not be hypocrites.
Yeah.
And thank you for catching me in that way. See, I appreciate that.
There's no problem.
I appreciate that.
There's no problem.
But again, we appreciate y'all for being here with us for like, what, 2 hours?
Yeah. But
we had some technical difficulties. Thank you for bearing with us.
And I was just talking to Quan. We will drop the books on our Gilded Sages stories. We'll have those books also inside of the story highlights. So if you want to read along with us, you want to challenge us with different readings, let us know.
Okay. Did we have any comments that anybody wanted us to address before we dip out?
Oh, let me check and see.
Because we're a small, intimate family right now.
Yeah, we're quite small right now. No, Quan basically had this thing about Trump not being better than P.T. Barnum. My thing is, America's best of all time marketer is Herbert Hoover. No, not Herbert Hoover. What's his name? FBI dude. I don't know.
J. Edgar Hoover.
J. Edgar. I don't like him that much. And not at all. But J. Edgar Hoover is the best politician America ever had, because he kept secrets like an old British whore.
That was a very, 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 very savage man. But again, when we talk about the statues coming down, that's another conversation that's being had without context. Because it's like, yeah, you taking down the statues, what you putting them up with. And again, I'm here for all of it, but at the same time, it just got to be done in a very strategic manner. And I think our community specifically is in a very precarious situation when it comes to being erased because we don't have the economic backend. And this is America, and this is capitalism, and America is built on individualism. Well, it's not built on individualism. It is marketing individualism, because I take that back. Everything is about teams. Everything is about teams. And if you aren't building with people, you're usually going to end up being a 1-8 because institutions are teams, man. So we thank y'all for coming out, watching the video. Again, drop anything in the comments to let us know what you want to see, what you want us to cover. And then, of course, we'll just be working on other ways to, reach out, engage. And then if you're locally in DC, you want to begin to, start having meetups as well as, discussing some of these things in person. As I'm a person who don't believe that all conversations should be had publicly, because again, people can weaponize a lot of different things. But these matters were already public, so it's more damage control at this point. But thank you all. Be safe. Enjoy your, what is this, Saturday?
Yes, it is.
Enjoy your Saturday, and we'll catch y'all again next time, man.